Okay, so what's new in the Transit Manager's Toolkit? Well, we just in December 2020 updated our 200 or so page Transit Manager's Toolkit, and this presentation will walk you through the multitude of changes. So if you looked at it in 2019 or even at some other point in 2020, you will really see a lot of new content, resources, etc. Let's take a look. We were very, very lucky this year to have 3 expert reviewers for our toolkit. First, Julia Castillo, Executive Director of the Harlem Transit Authority, also known as HERTA Public Transit. Laura Corff from United Community Action Program, Inc., which is also known as Cimarron Transit. She's the Transit Director. And Shauna Miller, who is the RTAP Program Manager from the Idaho Transportation Department, ITD. Laura and Shauna will be presenting today on some of the pages that they helped us review. Now, our reviewers are very special people because they're part of our National RTAP Review Board, and we are indebted to our review board. These are experts in their field from transit agencies, transit managers, state RTAP programs, state DOT programs, and they stay with us for 3 years and review all of our training and technical assistance products. We really couldn't do what we do without them. So thank you. We also want to give a shout out to the 2020 Toolkit Update Preparation Team. The picture at the top doesn't show these wonderful people. This is just the banner that is across all the toolkit pages. But this year we had the expertise of Beth Hamby from the KFH group and Michael and Patty Noel from Noel Training and Consulting. They did the lion's share of the research and writing of the toolkit updates for the terms of content and new resources, making sure all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed. So what is the Transit Manager's Toolkit? It was developed originally in 2014 for new rural transit managers. It provides every single bit of information they will need on day one when they step into the job to ensure that the rural transit organizations are operating smoothly, that their transit organizations are in compliance with the federal regulations associated with receiving FTA Section 5311 funding. That's the rural formula funding. But it's really the Transit Manager's Toolkit is much, much more. We've been told it's like a veritable encyclopedia. It really has everything anybody would need, not just to run a rural transit agency, but to know how rural transit agencies operate. Anybody can use this toolkit, and we've got about 11,000 hits, reviews in the past year, and it keeps growing and growing. Like I said, it was launched in 2014. We did an incremental update, I think, in 2016, a very, very comprehensive update in 2019. And this update contains many new resource links, new content, entirely new sections, new pages. I'll show you how to find it. That's the URL. And you might be asking, how did we find out or figure out what we needed to update? Well, we asked you. We did 2 large surveys, one of rural transit managers, one of state RTAP managers. And we asked you all to identify your hot topics, your target areas for the next year. And that was one way we identified the gaps. Another way, going back to our review board, we asked them directly. And they're right on the scene. They were able to help us find what for 2020 needed to be added to our toolkit. And third, the questions all of our users asked. Most of the questions we were able to find in our toolkit because we've kept it updated through the years. But of course, as all of you know, 2020 was what people are calling an unprecedented year between COVID, widespread violence, natural disasters, etc. There was really a lot that transit managers were not prepared for. So we set forth to include all of these gaps that were identified and came into our lives to provide guidance to transit managers in our toolkit. So if you go to our website, you don't even need the www, nationalrtap.org, mouse over toolkits and click on the Transit Managers Toolkit. The toolkit is alphabetical and it's at the bottom. And if you don't find it that way, there's lots of other ways to find it. You can search in a little search bar on our homepage. You can search in our resource library. And if you don't find it, there's a chat box right at the top. Just ask us and we will help you find it. What are some of the new sections that this presentation will be covering? Quite a lot. In the mission and leadership area, leading during a crisis. Of course, it covers COVID, but other crisis types as well. Human resources, many new sections were added. Teleworking, telecommuting, succession planning, ideas for improving employee satisfaction and morale. Diversity, inclusiveness, and treating others with dignity and respect. That's a big theme for 2020, and we were very glad to be able to include it in the toolkit, and we plan to do more training on this topic. Safety, security, and emergency management section. Handling conflict and driver de-escalation skills, preventing driver assaults. Drugs on the bus. Lessons learned, and we all have them from the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's take a walk through the toolkit, and our review board members and I will tell you about some of this new content that will help you manage your transit agency. So, leading during a crisis, and this is a picture of Jeremy Bell from the Choctaw Nation. And this picture actually isn't from our toolkit, it's from our best practices article on COVID, which was actually referenced a lot in this section of the toolkit, because he and the other best practices leaders gave us a lot of good information. So there's many types of crises, as I mentioned. The toolkit talks about examples of internal crises, such as accidents, could be as simple as power outages, or as complex as legal proceedings. External crises, of course, we all are thinking of pandemics, but they could also be natural disasters, criminal activity, anything that can happen from the outside world that can affect your transit agency. So this section, leading during a crisis, in the leadership section, talked about 7 leadership roles during a crisis for transit managers and for all staff who are in leadership roles. Prepare as much as you can before the crisis. Have a plan in place. Have checklists in place. Inform your staff. Model the behavior expected in others. As a transit leader, and you're also a human, as we all are, it's important to remain calm as you can, and the people in your agency will be able to follow suit. Communicate effectively. Plan out your communications. Use different types of communications, oral, written, internet, social media, and address employee concerns up front. As a transit manager, when there's a crisis, staff will be coming to you and saying, what do I do? What do I do? So like number 1, plan ahead. Number 5 is important. Take care of yourself. Like I said, we're all human, and when there's a crisis, stress is probably one of the first responses. So learn to manage the stress and have healthy habits. Take a broad, holistic view. We will get through this together. And celebrate success. If you were able to reopen your transit route during COVID, that is a big success and you should celebrate it. So leading during a crisis will help transit managers through the year 2020 and really any crisis, small or large. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who will talk about another theme that was prevalent in 2020 and probably long to come, teleworking.
The COVID pandemic created an opportunity for agencies to look at operating differently. Teleworking is one viable option for call center staff and those performing administrative tasks by the computer and/or telephone. It's recommended that agencies create telework policies to address requirements such as hours of work, telephone and email contact availability, virtual meetings, daily protocols, record keeping, and performance objectives. Policies should identify what equipment and software will be provided by the agency.
Great. Now, as we're teleworking, there's probably lessons learned. So the next iteration of the Transit Managers Toolkit will probably include a lot more best practices as we've all incorporated all of these teleworking success guidance products. Okay, so succession planning is a question that National RTAP staff have gotten a lot for transit agencies, for transit managers, for state dots, everything. When you have somebody who's been doing something for years and somebody new comes on the scene, how do you pass the torch? How do you make sure that continuity occurs and that operations run smoothly? Just like the pandemic plan or the crisis plan, all agencies should have a succession plan. Now, research that our toolkit preparers undertook found that only 15% of rural transit managers who responded to a national survey had succession plans in a recent survey. So this section of the toolkit hopefully will help agencies undertake their succession planning endeavors. So what are the steps? Incorporating succession planning into your existing planning efforts. If you're doing another plan, what happens when the manager leaves? How do you plan for succession? As with all of your plans, your succession plan should support the agency's mission and vision statement. There are practical things you can do. You can establish a mentoring program where seasoned transit managers or other staff can help new employees to become familiar with processes. And this doesn't have to be just with onboarding. This should be throughout their career to enable them to move up into the organization so they're ready to assume a management role. Consistently have open discussions and frequent communications with all staff. So everybody knows what everybody's doing, and if somebody's out, succession planning isn't just for if somebody retires, it's for somebody who's out for any length of time, so somebody can just step up. Have backup plans, again, if staff are not able to be there. This was from our succession planning Twitter chat, which found a lot of really good strategies. Cross-train staff. That way, if say your dispatchers know what your schedulers do and vice versa, they can step into the role if there's an absence. Involve senior leadership as well as human resources if you have that department in your succession planning efforts. Now carve out time for succession planning. Don't say, oh, well, so-and-so is retiring in 3 months or next year. We don't have to worry about it yet. Other things, if you don't give it precedence, will come up, and then you'll be scrambling at the end. So really take the time to do succession planning. And once you have a plan, like all plans, revisit and modify the succession plan every year to adjust to changing agency needs. Now, the next new section, ideas for improving employee satisfaction and morale. Well, as we've said many times in this presentation, 2020 was a very difficult year. So transit managers should do all they can to help their staff feel great about what they're doing, because they have all of you, everyone has been doing an awesome job in this difficult time. So these are a few things. Creating a culture of safety, especially during a pandemic. Make everything you do say safety, safety, safety. The safer you, your agency, your staff, and especially your drivers, your passengers are, the more satisfaction and obviously the smoother things will flow. So always be open and honest in communicating with staff, even if you don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. We certainly found that during this pandemic. There are still many, many answers that even the clinical experts don't have. Now, I'm a librarian, and if somebody asks me a question, I know I can answer it, but maybe I haven't heard of the topic. So here's a tip. I always say something like, that's a really great question. Let me write it down, and I'll get back to you as soon as I have the answer. The third major tip, encourage work-life balance. Like I said earlier, there's been a lot of stress. A lot of people have been absent due to the pandemic, and that makes it even more stressful. Really try to make your transit agency pleasant, working, even fun. If do everything you can. Ask for employee input in problem solving, policy development, planning. Your staff have great ideas, so involve them. Whenever feasible, involve employees who will be impacted by changes, both major and minor, and let them feel that they are an important person in the decision-making process, because they are. Thank every employee, formally, informally, people who go the extra mile, and let them know that you noticed and appreciated their efforts. That will go a long way to improving employee satisfaction and morale. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shauna, who will talk about the new section in the toolkit on diversity, inclusiveness, dignity, and respect.
Thank you, Kara. So treating coworkers with dignity and respect is essential to a positive work environment. This begins with recognizing and encouraging the diversity of the workforce and fostering an inclusive organization in which people from different backgrounds feel valued and respected. Employees should be treated with dignity and respect regardless of age, race, color, religion, gender, gender identity or orientation, including those transitioning to a different gender, national origin, and disability. Transit managers can help all employees to feel valued and respected by establishing organizational values that reflect the diversity of the workforce and the community the transit system serves. By adopting and consistently enforcing clear policies that prohibit harassment and discriminatory behavior. Encouraging career development for all employees, encouraging all qualified applicants to apply for employment opportunities and opportunities for advancement, making non-discriminatory hiring and promotion decisions, providing training to all employees on treating each other with dignity and respect, recognizing that all employees are stakeholders in organizational decisions, encouraging participation in problem solving as a team, being a good listener, taking employee concerns seriously, recognizing different cultural and religious holidays, and most importantly, leading by example and remembering that actions speak louder than words.
Thank you, Shauna. And Laura is going to walk us through another new section, handling conflict and driver de-escalation skills.
The goal is to prevent driver assaults. Drivers must receive a clear message from management that their job is to inform riders of onboard policies. When drivers meet passengers' expectations, things go well. But there are times when a passenger who is angry or even dangerous can board a bus. Conflicts can result from pandemic stress, fear and anxiety coupled with isolation, loneliness and difficulty in getting what a passenger is used to under normal situations can cause frustration, agitation, and inflexible behavior. So how a driver acts and reacts to a passenger can either escalate or de-escalate a situation. Drivers should be trained on how to handle conflict, de-escalate situations, and prevent assaults. Passengers are people with a full range of human emotions. Drivers should approach all passengers with dignity, respect, and kindness. Passengers should be greeted with friendliness and confidence. Drivers should convey a helpful and professional attitude toward passengers. If it is the driver's role to support and explain policies, explanations should be polite and consistent. Drivers must stay vigilant when dealing with someone who is upset and be mindful that stress can intensify the situation. Drivers should not take comments personally. Staying calm is crucial. Showing that they are willing to work to solve the problem is the best solution. Often a compliment can disarm an irritable passenger. In tense situations, the driver's first statement can influence the passenger's attitude. Drivers should slow their speech and lower their voice. Drivers should be trained to pick their battles wisely and realize when a situation could escalate into a larger issue. At the first chance, the driver should discreetly contact a dispatcher. Drivers should stay in place with the door open. Don't close the door on a dangerous passenger. Remind drivers to provide friendly, safe service. Display a positive attitude with everyone.
Thank you. And moving on to the next page, lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. Laura will also walk us through that section.
Although most U.S. transit systems had not prepared for a pandemic and found themselves responding in real time to an ever-changing environment, a number of COVID resources were developed to support the transit industry. Every transit agency should have a pandemic response plan. Communications with staff, passengers, and the media are important. Disseminating information through the agency in the form of staff education is also key. Develop an inventory of PPE. Consider policies for ill or high-risk employees and anticipate a minimum of at least 10% reduction in staff. You may consider adjusting operations, whether prioritizing trips, routes, or other alterations of service. Agency response and recommended protocols. Transit managers should subscribe to email updates from federal and state agencies. It is recommended that drivers and riders wear face coverings. Install barriers for driver social distancing. Regularly clean and disinfect vehicles and facilities throughout the day. Review fare collection practices. Provide guidance on safest protocols for mobility device securement. Limit trips to those that are essential, but be careful limiting ADA paratransit riders. Consider administrative leave for at-risk employees and consider screening passengers.
And we know that our 2021 update of this toolkit will probably have additional guidance on this lessons learned as things evolve. Now, the next one will be drugs on the bus that Shauna will be walking us through. And this is not about employees, this is about passengers, as drugs, some of them were made legal over the past year.
One onboard situation any bus operator may face is seeing or hearing that a rider is showing, selling, or using drugs during a bus ride. It is important that management issues a policy statement concerning passenger behavior while using the transit services. Typically, this list will involve the do's and don'ts of riding a bus and would include passenger guidelines for both alcohol and illegal drug use while riding. While a policy is very important, it is vital that the manager makes it very clear that the bus operator should not risk themselves or other passengers' safety when faced with a person showing, selling, or using illegal drugs. A person under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol may respond with anger or behavior that quickly escalates towards a negative outcome. The operator should inform the passenger of the rule, but not enforce it. Most passengers will respond in a positive manner when informed, but will respond negatively to enforcement. The operator should treat the individual with dignity and respect, but report their observations to supervisors as soon as it is safe for them to do so. It is also important for operators to recognize that many passengers have various legal medications that can be easily misunderstood as illegal substances. For that reason, it is also important to observe rider behavior. If the person who is suspected of using drugs shows no sign of poor judgment or behavior, simply remaining aware and delivering the passenger to their destination may be the best outcome. Drivers should also be trained to look for suspicious activities and activities to ensure that drug distribution isn't occurring on their vehicle, such as watching for cuts in the back of seats that tend to serve as a drop or pickup point.
Okay. And the last new section is an entirely new page on our toolkit, not within another section, but it is one on communicating with the public. So Laura will talk about that.
All right. Public notice and engagement should be part of planning. Types of planning efforts that need and sometimes require public involvement include changes in services and fares, developing local coordinated plans, and when applying for grants. I'm going to start over. Communicating with the public. Always keep the public informed about services. Ongoing publicity, available information about the transit agency services and how to use them are essential. Materials typically used by public transit agencies include a rider's guide with days and hours of operation, route maps, schedules, fare information, payment methods, passenger codes of conduct, as well as information about accessibility of the service to riders with disabilities is standard. This information should also be available on your organization's website. And then with public notice, Other passenger surveys, community surveys, focus groups, and public meetings are a few strategies to consider for public engagement. Email or postal letters can be used to provide notice of surveys and meetings to stakeholders such as municipalities, tribes, private providers, social service agencies, advocacy organizations, major employers, educational facilities, and others. The toolkit provides resources on conducting public notice and engagement activities for hosting public and stakeholder meetings. During a crisis is another important time to communicate with the public. You can find emergency information dissemination technical brief guides in several sections of the toolkit. Providing customer service is also a form of communicating. Any transit staff who respond to customer inquiries by phone or email, as well as those who interact with passengers during the course of their workday, should be trained in providing excellent customer service. National RTAP offers training modules and resources including customer-driven service, serving individuals with disabilities, customers making complaints, and difficult situations. Regarding education and outreach, ensure your information is easy to obtain, as well as offer the community opportunities to ask questions and share feedback. Take opportunities to speak to community leaders, stakeholders, and decision makers. You may be attending a chamber or coalition meeting in a community setting with potential passengers, caregivers, or others who may know people who need transportation. Speak to senior centers, staff a booth at a community event or health fair. Written approaches to distribute information can be submitted to news outlets as well as be posted on social media. Now, hosting public and stakeholder meetings. The strategy for getting input from the public means sharing information about your agency, its plans, and projects. The facility where the meeting is held should be accessible to people with disabilities. The meeting should be announced several weeks in advance, and the notice should provide instructions for requesting a sign language interpreter or other accommodations that would not be automatically provided. Notices should be sent to news organizations, stakeholders, posted on your website and social media. Be sure to document all notices. Ask attendees to sign in and document comments made by your attendees.
Thank you, Laura. And you might notice that this page in the PowerPoint is done very simply. It's in plain language, large, clear type, short bullet points, which is a nice tip for when you're doing any kind of written or web communication with the public. So now we're going to move to, that's all the new pages, sections, etc. So now we're going to move to new resources. I said at the beginning, and every time we update the toolkit, which we do incrementally too, if we find a link has changed, there's some links that are updated, some that are brand new, like the CARES Act, the FTA Emergency Relief Program, the Continuing Appropriations Act, which was just a bill when the toolkit was updated, the entry-level driver training requirements, the master agreement for FTA grants, the 2020 certifications and assurances, the 2020 comprehensive review guide, the Office of Management and Budget guidance for grants and agreements, and FTA FAQs regarding the National Defense Authorization Act was added. And of course, the FTA COVID-19 FAQs. Those are just some of the major new resources that were added to the toolkit. This presentation will be posted on our website and our webinars page, but also with the toolkit itself, which I should get time to show you. It has a PDF of the entire 200 and something page toolkit. So if you're just looking for, say, the emergency relief program or the certifications and insurances, you can go to the PDF, hit Control F to find it, pinpoint it immediately, and go right to the link. So that's one of the nice features of the toolkit. We will always keep it updated with the real links you need for transit management and compliance. So we're up to Q&A, and I see we have one question, but I think what I'm going to do is just show you very quickly the toolkit I showed you in the presentation. And I see someone raise their hand. I'll get to it very quickly. You can see that banner. You can see toolkits. You're in the Transit Manager's Toolkit. You can navigate by clicking the downward facing arrows on the left side to get to exactly what you need. Like if you want to go to Human Resources, you can go right to the page there. Go back to Welcome. We also, on our Welcome, want to acknowledge the many, many people on our review board and others who have helped in previous versions of the toolkit. It's really a toolkit of many hands. There's
Kara?
a glossary. Yeah.
I don't believe we're seeing what you're trying to do. We're still seeing the Q&A page from the PowerPoint.
Sorry about that. Let's go back. So here's the welcome page. Welcome to the Transit Manager's Toolkit. You can download the full text. It'll open in a new link. All of the pages. You'll see the table of contents. That's one way to navigate. And another way to navigate is the navigation buttons on the left. The major sections pop down so you can get to anything within them. And each of the sections have anchor links if you want to get to a specific part. All of the live links within each section will open up into a new page. Okay, so let's go to the Q&A. We have one question. How should agencies handle communication with populations that do not have English as a first answer language? We do have in our compliance section a civil rights section that talks about language assistance, LEP, for persons with limited English proficiency. So this provides guidance as well as the, in the bottom of all of them, they're the section sources, the DOT policy guidance concerning recipients' responsibilities to limited language recipients, limited English proficient persons. So we can't give you regulations, but US DOT and FTA certainly can. So we have included all of the pertinent regulations in our toolkits.